Hello everyone and welcome to Pyanodons mods. This is Otaku Showboat and today we will be discussing the borax processing chain. If you have been enjoying these tutorials thus far, please be sure to do all of the engagement and social stuff below the video. This series is of course supported by my patrons at patreon.com/Pyanodon, and of course you can also support Pyanodon's mods development at patreon.com/Pyanodon. Today, oh boy, so this is the updated video for the boron, effectively, the boron production line, and all of the side stuff, uh, not all, most of the side stuff that we get out of the boron processing chain. There is a thing to note here. I haven't shown the boron carbide as part of this because it's just something that's slightly separate, but it's still made out of trioxide, so just keep in mind we're not looking at literally all of the stuff here that we need the boron for. However, we're going to discuss a lot of it today. So, this is a very simple chain, and this is going to end up to be a relatively short video, but it is a chain that I would like to discuss anyway. So borax, and if you want to see this built out, you can watch the original video where I discuss this chain as well. This is in the light of all of the recent changes that have happened to the Pi suite, including the release of Pi Alien Life. So the actual form of the chain is the same. How it actually looks is identical to how it's always been. We have raw borax that we have to mine using syngas to mine. Bear that in mind. Raw borax is mined in crystal mines using syngas as a fluid input. This also is unique in that it's one of the few instances where the crystal mine attempts to output multiple units of ore each cycle. So I would highly recommend that you output your raw borax into chests. So have a chest on the output of the mine, and then you can unload from the chest through whatever method that you want in order to actually get the true output from those crystal mines, because the way mines work is that they won't start a new cycle until their hopper is empty. So they have to unload all of the units of ore that they mine in a given cycle in order to continue with the next mining cycle, which can dramatically mess up your math in regards to how many to place for a given throughput. So, with that said, raw borax processes into borax in a 1-to-1 ratio in washers. This is the most important and most used of the boron processing chain, borax processing chain, however you want to call it. Straight up washed borax here is what is used in the majority of ore processing chains to do molten and casting. Sometimes just molten and not casting, sometimes doing both the molten and the casting. It really depends on the ore we're talking about here, but that's primarily what the actual borax is used for. Now, from here, we have to begin electrolysis. We electrolyze the borax with hydrogen into a diborane gas. Now, diborane gas in and of itself really doesn't have too many uses by itself. It is needed for this stuff, heavy metal ATPases, which, stuff. Yeah, that's really late game stuff to consider. But it is used at Circuit 2s for the light p-doped silicon. So you will need it going into that, but you'll actually need it even sooner because you need it to make boric acid. And boric acid is just electrolyzing again the diborane with water to make boric acid. Do I suggest doing this and bussing in pipes your boric acid? Hell no. Uh, Send your diborane on your fluid bus if you even have a fluid bus, and even if you would rather, like, if you want borax on your bus anyway, don't bother having diborane gas on the fluid bus. Just use the borax and do these two electrolysis steps at whatever site you need either the diborane or the boric acid. Like, it makes more sense to just move the borax around than to move a fluid around. And even later on in the game, when you have trains going, I would still say it's probably easier just to move borax around and make whatever diborane and boric acid, etc., even further down this list, on site out of borax, just to do this chain wherever you have borax. Or even the raw borax. I mean, if you have the space available, just completely skip doing this and just train the raw borax around. But if you want to have a centralized processing setup of raw borax and borax, that's fine too. Just put the borax on, and the reason why this is somewhat optional is that it is a 1-to-1 ratio. The diborane is, of course, something like 5 times as dense as the boric acid, so you're able to throw a lot more value around in pipes by piping the diborane rather than piping the boric acid. We've got like a full throughput pipe here of the boric acid out of 15 borax, when we could instead be piping around a full pipe of diborane worth a heck of a lot more raw borax, which would make a heck of a lot more boric acid. So that's a little lesson about pipe density there. The boric acid, to get into green science, is going to require you to make boron trioxide. Now, boron trioxide is used for optical sets. These beautiful things. Optical sets. It needs molten glass plus boron trioxide. You need these to get into green science, as well as a lot of the other alien life stuff at this point. It also gets used in boron carbide, as well as the rest of the processing chain going forward. So do bear that in mind. It's also used for glass fibers. That's going to be necessary as you go along. And it's used to make quartz tubes, which is a pretty important new resource that's been added into the game that will dramatically improve the output of hydrogen chloride by allowing you to use a lot fewer lamps than previously. It really improves the use of the lamps by adding these quartz tubes, and they have a few other uses as well. So definitely keep all of that in mind. Now, you have to add coke to the boric acid to get into the boron trioxide, so do bear that in mind. That is where you will stop in general through green science. After green science, you're at chemical science. That's when you will probably be considering going up into boron and or the boron carbide, which I already sort of showed. The carbide doesn't necessarily get used until you make carbon aerogel, as well as stuff that's later on in purple and utility science, so that can be pushed aside for a little bit later in the game. So ultimately, the boron ends up coming first, that you may want, and you may want it because you need boron to make very, very, very specific things. You want boron to make very, very specific things. This is carbide. This is showing me carbide. This is showing me the stuff that the boron carbide is used for, as well as the stuff that the boron is used for. So the boron is used specifically for the neodymium iron boron alloy, again, later on in the game. It is used to make lithium niobate, again, used later on in the game. uh, purple-ish science phase. It is used for these nanocrystalline cores, which again, later on, purple utility space science phases of the game. But in particular, it is used to make proton donors. This is the biggie. This is the biggie. It is used to make proton donors, which, if you know anything about the proton donors, you know that it's going to be required to do several useful processes for particle acceleration recipes. So this is the thing you need to get into the proton donors to do all of those recipes for particle acceleration, and that's going to be the major expense on your boron. It's going to be used for these other things too: the lithium niobate, the neodymium iron boron alloy. This is also known as rare earth alloy, and capacitor cores. Yeah, all of these things. Yeah, this is rare earth stuff here, and it's all part of that processing chain thingies. These nanocrystalline cores, yeah, they come pretty late as well. So you may notice here that we'll take our trioxide, our boron trioxide, ball mill it into a whole bunch of dust, and then use a high pressure furnace with acetylene, which you know is a whole bunch of coke to get into acetylene, a whole bunch of coke, as well as aluminium plates, a pretty decent sink for your aluminium plates. I'll point out this will be, I mean, it looks like a low value, 3.75 from 15 in, but grand scheme of things, this is actually a bit, like, there's not a lot of things that consume aluminium as aluminium plates to begin with, so this is going to be something that you'll probably be thankful for to sink aluminium plates, ultimately. Like, this is one of the few things where it's actually useful to spend the plates, because you will be vastly overproducing on your aluminium plates. I can almost guarantee that you'll have no significant demand on your aluminium plates as plates. It's pretty well balanced, actually, as you go along on the aluminium plates. I say well balanced, even though I'm also saying that you're going to be backed up forever on your plates. So yeah, and until now, until this, then you can start using your buffers of aluminium plates to get into boron mixture. Now the boron mixture needs to get mixed. We need to mix our mixture with refined syngas and hydrogen chloride to give us boron, and it loops back. I guess I should have the matrix solver on for this, because it does loop back some additional diborane. So if we want the true values here, we can have our matrix solver on, and we can see, oh hey, it makes 3.47 boron in the end. Well, if we have a look at 3.47 out by doing the particle acceleration recipe to get boron, we can see that all you need to do is this. And all you need to spend is this. This beautiful, wonderful stuff. This beautiful, wonderful stuff that you should have a lot of by the point in the game that you can actually do this. So keep in mind that the proton receivers are just proton donors, or crystallographic substrate with sulfur. That's that. And then the substrate is nichrome, ceramides, rayon, and propene. You've seen all of these on the path to Circuit 2s. This is available to you pretty early on in the game, at Blue Science. But the problem with this is that you can't do it until you have Purple Science, Production Science. Why? When you get access to this particle acceleration to get boron at Blue? Well, it's because you don't actually get access to the fine carbon dust from coke recipe until nanotechnology at Production Science, Purple Science. So it's blocked by the production of fine carbon dust, converting fine carbon dust into boron with proton receivers, which are significantly less expensive overall. So this is a very viable alternative, shall we say, to the boron, if you have the power for it. So as you can see here, this would be 648.2 megawatts of power from particle accelerators. And do note that particle accelerators do not allow for you to use efficiency modules to reduce the power that they consume. They are coded to not take that effect, and if you find ways to make them take that effect, it's cheating, because it is definitely not intended to be able to use efficiency modules in the particle accelerators. They definitely, in more recent times, have also been removed for productivity, where productivity has been removed for these. And there's a separate script that prevents the efficiency modules in them. So don't believe Hellmod all the time with what modules you can put in these. It's a script that prevents efficiency in these, and it also prevents the beacon effect of efficiency on the particle accelerators. So if we look at the power comparison, yeah, 36.9, 648.2. I consider this simpler because a lot of this stuff here, outside of the fine carbon dust, like the actual creation of your proton receivers, you're probably going to be doing that anyway. Like, you're probably going to be wanting to do other processes that use the proton receivers, other particle acceleration. I think that's, what is that again? Vanadium. Vanadium has a particle accelerator recipe out of proton receivers. That is the one. Vanadium has that. As well as there's diamonds that use the proton donors. Diamonds use proton donors, which is why we are considering boron here. And both of those just allow you to basically just skip doing vanadium processing, even though vanadium processing is pretty simple, actually. It's not as hard as it seems to do actual vanadium processing, and diamonds again it's a lot of intermediates. It's really heavy on belt throughput for the intermediate products on that, and there's a whole bunch of loops on the diamond processing chain, so it's one to consider skipping, and that's what you'll probably be primarily using the diamonds, or be using the boron for the proton donors. That's a key. Oh, and then of course gold, the copper to silver to gold setup for particle acceleration. Yeah, that's also going to use proton donors. So do bear that in mind. Now, what is so bad about doing this? Why would I want to do this and just spend the power for it? Why would I just want to spend the power as opposed to doing this through boron? Well, as it turns out, it needs 519.3 units of refined syngas, as well as the same amount as hydrogen chloride. That's the biggie here. If we have a look at hydrogen chloride, even in the best case scenarios, example of a quote-unquote best case scenario, making the hydrogen chloride with quartz tubes as one method. There are many methods of getting hydrogen chloride. I'm going to throw that out there. Many methods. All of them are expensive. We're not going to dive into the details today about which is the least expensive of the very expensive methods of getting hydrogen chloride. This is going to be an example using quartz tubes to improve the ratio of return of lamps. It goes from being a 50% chance to return your lamps to a 90% chance to return your lamps, which is pretty significant, to say the least, on the creation of your hydrogen chloride. This is still, however, going to need a significant amount of chlorine and hydrogen, which in this circumstance, yes, there are also many methods of getting chlorine. This is just going to be an example using saline water coming out of condensed distillates, ultimately out of a pretty significant amount of crude oil. If you have access to crude oil, or tar, if you have a significant access to tar, even more than this as tar. Note the gasoline here, that's going to be expenditure of stuff. That's going to be an expenditure of stuff no matter what. No matter what, the gasoline is going to be pretty expensive, and tin chromium alloys if you do go that route. Yeah, that's just the one example of the hydrogen chloride, and then the refined syngas, which you can also make out of condensed distillates, by the way, using tin chromium alloy. Yeah, it's even more stuff, and it's even more gasoline. It's stuff, logistics, like building counts. Look at all the buildings, even Mark II buildings. Can you imagine Mark I buildings being twice this value for the most part? It's a lot of logistics. It is extremely logistically heavy to properly feed a boron processing setup. Are you going to need 3.47? It depends on your production goals. Are you really going to need 3.47? Are you going to be satisfied with just one? It's still going to be the same logistical challenge, even at just one on the output. If we do product input here and just switch it over to one, and see that it's going to be 150 of each of these gases. That's still pretty logistically heavy. It's more reasonable numbers, yes, but it's still pretty heavy, especially here if you're doing this for the refined syngas. But there's lots of ways of getting refined syngas. I'm sure better ways of getting the refined syngas, and I'm sure better ways of potentially even getting the hydrogen chloride and or the chlorine. So all of these are things you have to consider. It's like, do you do all of this logistics, which, to be fair, you have done already if you're at Blue Science, and you're playing a standard Pi game. If you have niobium, which you should, by Blue Science, have niobium, you've figured out a way to get refined syngas that you can ideally scale. You've figured out a way of getting into the hydrogen chloride, again, for niobium. To get into niobium, the refined syngas mines it. The hydrogen chloride is used to process it, along with organic solvent and ammonia. So, yeah, it's interesting. Let's just say that it's one of those things you have to really think about. It's like, do I expand a setup to make it bigger? Do I copy paste setups? Do I really go through all this, or am I able to wait for Purple Science, that brain Purple Science, to unlock nanotech to get access to fine carbon dust so I can just particle accelerate this stuff? Or do I just get a trickle of this to fill whatever need I have at the beginning, whatever I want to use this for? Do I just get a trickle of it until I get into this and transition over? These are all questions that you will need to answer. With that, I have exhausted every point I can think of off the top of my head here about this chain. I, of course, would like to thank you all for watching. This has been Otaku Showboat. If you have been enjoying these tutorial videos thus far, please be sure to do all of the engagement and social stuff below the video. This series is, of course, supported by my Patreon patrons at patreon.com/otakushowboat. You can support Pyanodon's mods development at patreon.com/Pyanodon, and I will, of course, see you all on the next one.